And a pleasant good day to you all, wherever you happen to be. I would like to welcome you to another episode of Unstoppable Mindset. Today, we get to have a conversation with Nana Ekua Brew-Hammond. And Nana has a lot of interesting things to talk about. She's written books, she's done a variety of different things. And rather than me giving it all away, it'll be more fun to let her tell the stories and get a chance for us to listen to her. She is in Oakland, California, so she's at the other end of the state from me. And we were just comparing the weather. It's a lot colder where she is than where I live down here in Victorville, where today it's 104 degrees outside. And Nana, you said it was like what, somewhere around 70?
Yeah, it's 68.
There you go. See, lovely weather. Well, Nana, I want to welcome you to Unstoppable Mindset. We're really glad you're here, and I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us.
I feel the same way. Thank you for having me on your amazing show, and it's so wonderful to be in conversation with you.
Well, I'm glad we get a chance to spend some time together, and we can we can talk about whatever we want to talk about and make it relevant and interesting. So we'll do that. But why don't we start with what I love to do at the beginning of these is to talk about the early Nana growing up and all that. So take us back as close to the beginning as your memory allows.
Oh gosh, as my memory allows. I was born in Plattsburgh, New York, which is
Oh,
upstate near
I've
Montreal,
I've
Canada.
been there.
Oh, cool.
In the
Nice.
winter, I even crossed the lake in an icebreaker. But yeah,
Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay.
does that
Yeah.
bring back memories?
Well, I was only there for till I was like 2 years old. But I have gone up there in the winter and it is cold.
Yes, it is
Um,
cold.
yeah, so I was born there, but I grew up in New York City, and ha that really was sort of my life. I lived in New York, grew up in Queens, New York,
Hmm.
and then at 12 years old, my parents decided to send me to Ghana to go to school. And that was sort of like the biggest change of my life. Like I know that there was a before Ghana and an after Ghana Nana. And so, yeah,
Wow. So when was that? What year was that you went to Ghana?
that was 1990, August of
Okay.
1990, actually.
Wow. So what did you think about going to Ghana? I mean, clearly that was a major change.
Yeah, my parents are from Ghana originally. So when, they would always talk about it. Back then, long distance phone calls to Ghana. That was the extent of my sort of understanding of Ghana, the food that we ate at home, etc. So going to Ghana was just sort of mind blowing to me, to sort of be crossing, getting on a plane and all of that, and then being in the country that my parents had left to come to the United States was just sort of like, oh wow. Connecting with family members. It was a lot to process, because life was very, 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 very different.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it was just sort of a wild, eye-opening experience about just the world and myself and my family that ultimately inspired me to write a book about it because it was just it was a lot to process.
Why did they want you to go to Ghana to study?
Yeah, so in the 90s in New York City, and in the late 80s, there was the crack epidemic was happening.
Hmm.
And I mean, I remember we lived in a house in Queens, and when we would, part of our chores was to sweep in front of the house, rake the leaves, that kind of thing in the fall. And we would all the time there would be crack files, like as we're
Hmm.
sweeping up. And I think we were young. My sister was, a teenager. I was 12. And my younger brother had just been born. He was just like a little under a year old. And I think my parents just didn't feel that it was a safe place for us as kids to grow up. And so yeah, they wanted to kind of give us an opportunity to get out of, that environment for a while.
What did you think of it?
I mean, as a kid, you never want to leave what's
Yeah.
familiar to you. So it was, I would say it was interesting because initially, I loved it. I was like, I actually campaigned, I was like, I really, would like to stay in Ghana, but I didn't want to stay for, the whole 3 years, which is what happened. I wanted to stay for maybe like a year, kind of try it, go to school for a year. I found it this really cool adventure, go to boarding school, and on all of that. But my parents made the decision that we should just sort of ride it out and finish. Like I had to finish high school, and yeah, so that
So
was great for me.
so you were there for 3 years.
Yes.
So you were 12. So by 15, you had finished high school.
Yeah, because the system there is different. It was at the time the British system. So it was like a form system where I entered in form three because it wasn't quite the equivalent in the sense that I probably should have started in form two or form one. But I was also an advanced student, and the way the system there works is you have to take a common entrance exam from primary school to get into secondary school. So it's
Hmm.
very difficult to get into school midstream there. So we had to go through all of these hoops, and there was an opening in Form 3, and that was higher than than where I should have been, but I was advanced. So I was able to get into that school that way.
You did okay, I assume.
I did. I mean, I struggled, which was interesting because I was a very, good, strong student in the States, but I struggled mightily when I first got there. And throughout, it was never easy,
Hmm.
but I was able to manage.
Now, did your sister also go to Ghana?
She did, and she was hopping mad.
How old was she when you were
She was
12?
she was 17, so she
Oh,
was
okay. Yeah.
almost about to go to college. She was really excited about like that portion of life. And then it was like, okay, she's in Ghana. She was hopping mad.
Well, how long did she stay?
Well, so she stayed for 2 years because what Ghana has is sort of like at the time it was something called sixth form, which is again the British system. So it's
Hmm.
sort of like a college prep in between the equivalent of that. So she basically did that in Ghana.
Okay. Well, and your little brother didn't go to Ghana.
Not yeah, not
Not
in
yet.
the
You mean they didn't send him over at 1 year?
US. No.
Okay. Well, that's probably a good idea. Well, so looking back on it, what do you think about having spent 3 years in Ghana?
Looking back on it, I think it was actually really, really good for me. I mean, that doesn't take away from the fact that it was very difficult. It was very, very challenging, not only like, academically, I was bullied really hard at this boarding school that I went to. The girls just kind of made my life hell. Um, but what was amazing about it for me was that I had exposure to Ghanaian culture in a way that I would never have had in the States. As I mentioned to you, Ghana was sort of that country over there when I lived in America. And, it existed as, family members coming to visit, long distance phone calls, the food that we ate, the accents that we had, things that made us different. And at the time that was not cool. As a kid,
Hmm.
you just want to fit in and you don't want to be different. And going to Ghana was my opportunity to learn that, wow, I didn't have to be embarrassed or ashamed of that difference. There was so much to be proud of, my family was, a sprawling family. My grandmother owned a business, my grandfather owned a business. It was really it was eye-opening just to sort of be in another environment. People knew how to, pronounce my name, and I didn't have to, just explain things. And that was really affirming for a 12-year-old and a
Hmm.
13-year-old when you're going through that. So it was really good for me. And in Ghana is where I came to know Christ. I became a Christian. And it was something that spiritually I was not really, I don't know, I just didn't really think about spiritual. I did on some level, but going to Ghana, everything just felt so palpable. It was really like we're praying for this and it happened. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it felt very, yeah, it was just a time in my life when life really felt um the mysteries of life really felt like they were open to me.
Mm. Interesting. And um, so you clearly gained a lot of insight and knowledge and experience over there that you were able to bring back with you when you came.
Yes. Yes. When I returned to the States, I was just I think of myself, I guess, as a weirdo. Like when I came back, I just felt so weird because I couldn't really fully connect with my friends because I had missed out on 3 years of culture,
Hmm.
and you don't realize how much culture means like until like, you don't have those references anymore. I didn't know the songs that were popular.
Yeah.
I didn't, know about, I forget, there was some sort of jeans that were really popular while I was gone. I didn't know what they were. I didn't have a pair of them. So it was just sort of this interesting time. And I was also young because I had finished high school and I was 15
Yeah.
and my friends were, sophomores in
Sophomores.
high
Yeah.
school, and I was beginning the process of looking into college. So it was just a really isolating time for me. Um, but also, interesting. And I say it was ultimately in the wash of it. I think it was good because it enabled me to sort of I guess mature in a way that enabled me to start college earlier and you know sort of see the world in a much different way.
So when you went to college, what did you want to do, or had you decided to start laying plans for a major and what you wanted to do post college?
I did not know what I wanted to do. I kind of I mean, I kind of thought I wanted to be a doctor. I
Ah,
thought I wanted to be a doctor. Like all my life growing up, I was like, I'm going to be a doctor. And I was a science student in Ghana, but I struggled mightily. But still, I entered college with this, the plans to become a biopsychology major. And, you know, I took 2, 3 classes. Well, more than that. I did like a year of classes, and I was just like, this is not for me. Not for me at all. But yeah, yeah. So it was that was a little rough, but
things
I
happen. So
figured
what
it
did
out.
what did you go off and do then?
I ended up majoring in political science and
Hmm.
Africana studies. And I remember taking a political science class my freshman year. And my professor was amazing, but it was interesting to me, I think, looking back now, being able to think about the world in a way that was sort of linking history and politics and culture together. And I think that was interesting to me because I had just come from Ghana and had been exposed to like sort of this completely different culture, completely different political system. And kind of having that thinking or that wonderment of like, wow, life can be so different somewhere else, but it's still life and it's still happening. But also having that connection as an American to America and what's happening there. So holding both of those things in my hands when I got to college, what I was really sort of intrigued by the idea of studying politics and studying culture and society.
And that's what you did.
Yes, I did.
And so you got a degree in political science,
Yes, a double degree, political science and Africana studies.
Africana studies. Okay. Um, and again, that's probably pretty interesting because the Ghana influence had to help with the Africana studies and the desire to do that. And you certainly came with a good amount of knowledge that had to help in getting that as a part of your major.
Well, interestingly, my focus was on African American
Mm,
study because I really, growing up as an immigrant, like with immigrant parents, their understanding or their thought process wasn't necessarily I don't know. They didn't really raise us to think about race or being black because their consciousness wasn't about that. They were immigrants. You know what I
yeah,
mean? So they
yeah,
weren't thinking about that. So I was actually quite curious because I did grow up in America and I was black, but I didn't understand the history of America in that way. And I remember actually when I was in, was it the third, or maybe it was the second or third grade, um, or maybe it was fifth grade. I did a project on the Civil War,
mm,
and I remember being so interested in it because I just didn't, it wasn't, I was so fascinated by American history because I really wasn't I didn't understand it in the way that maybe somebody who wasn't the child of immigrants, might, connect with it. So I was just yeah. So I was really fascinated by African American history. So I ended up double majoring in it and concentrating on African American politics, which was really fascinating to me.
yeah. And there certainly has been a fair amount of that over the years, hasn't there?
Yes, there has.
But you can you can cope with it, and again, but did your time in Ghana kind of influence any of what you did in terms of African American studies? Did it help you at all?
I don't know. I don't because I think what Ghana helped me with was I'll say this. I remember one time in Ghana in class, we were reading a book by an author we were reading a play actually by a Ghanaian writer who was writing about a Ghanaian man who married an African American woman and brought
Hmm.
her to his home. And there was a lot of clash between them because, they were both black, but they had different sort of backgrounds.
Yeah.
And I remember the teacher asking, because the wife that he brought home, the African American woman, mentioned certain things about America, and no one in the classroom could answer any questions about America. And I was the only one who could. And I was, very, very sort of shy in that school and in that context. But I remember that day feeling so emboldened. Like I was like, I can actually contribute to this conversation.
Hmm.
And so maybe, you know, in on some level, when I got back to the States, maybe there was some interest in linking those two things together. But it
Hmm.
wasn't as is in life, it wasn't obvious to me then. It was sort of just kind of me following my interest and curiosity. And I didn't set out to be an Africana Studies double major, but I ended up taking so many classes that I had the credits and I was like, okay, I guess I have 2 degrees now or two concentrations.
Yeah. Did you go and do any advanced work beyond getting bachelor's degrees?
No, I did not. When I graduated, I initially thought I might go to law school.
Hmm.
But this was me again following my muse. I realized that my real interest was in writing papers. When I was in college, give me a 15-page paper, 20-page paper, I was ecstatic. I loved writing papers. And I think that's one of the reasons too why I loved political science and Africana studies because we were assigned tons of papers and it enabled me to sort of, writing these papers enabled me to kind of think through questions that I had or process what I was reading or thinking about or feeling. And so when I graduated from college, I got a job and was working, trying to figure out, okay, do I want to go to law school? But at the time that I graduated, that was also during the time of like the dot-com boom.
Hmm.
And there were a lot of online magazines that were looking for writers. And so I started kind of, submitting and I got some things published. And as that was happening, I was like, I think this is what I want to focus on.
So when did you really know that you were a writer then?
I mean, I think that when I got back, when I started working, so I got a job in advertising and I was working, as an assistant in the on the account side of things. But there was this whole creative department that, got to, come up with all of the, the taglines and write commercials and write jingles and all that kind of stuff. And I was like so fascinated by that. And that's what I thought, okay, I could if I need a job, I need money, and I want to write, so maybe this is what I need to be doing. And so I ultimately did get a job as a copywriter and I still, do that work today. But I think I always knew that I needed to write and I wanted to actually write about my experience in Ghana. So I remember, I started kind of very fledgling, would began to write into that. And um, I ultimately started writing the book that became my first book, Powder Necklace, on the subway to and from work. Every morning I would wake up very early, write what I could, get ready for work, write on the bus, write on the subway, get to work, after work, repeat.
Hmm.
And it took me many years, but that's what I did. And I wrote my first book.
And that was published in 2010, right?
Yes, it was.
Did you self-publish or?
I did not self-publish. I was published by Simon and Schuster, Simon and Schuster's Atria Books, Washington Square Press. And part of my process was I started just kind of, the internet. The internet was new. It was something that was available to me. So I started just kind of Googling, how do you get published? And they said you needed a literary agent. So I started looking online for literary agents. And because I lived in New York City at the time, I would literally write my query letters and like hand deliver them
Hmm.
different agencies. And one woman, after 4 years of looking, said, okay, this sounds interesting. I'd love to meet with you. And I didn't believe, I was like, wow, I've been rejected for 4 years and somebody actually wants this. And she was able to sell the book. And I was shocked. I was like, Simon and Schuster, okay. And at the time they bought it, the US was going through the whole financial, crisis, the
Yeah.
recession in 2008. So they held my book for a year and then we began the process in 2009 and then we were on track to publish it in 2010.
Wow. Well, tell me about that book.
Yeah, Powder Necklace is a novel. It's a fictionalized account of my experience going to high school in Ghana. When I went to school in Ghana, I went to a girls' boarding school in the mountains of Ghana's central region, and that school was going through a major water crisis. We did not, I mean, the short story is that I guess because of we were on the mountain, the water pressure was very low, and so it was really difficult to get the water up that mountain, and they didn't have like enough you know, tanks around the school and what have you. So we had one artificial well, and then we had like an underground well. And that was it. And the underground well wasn't always, full of water.
Yeah.
So for it to service the whole school, it was really difficult. So we had to bring in our own water. And then it became if you had money, you could bring water, but if you didn't have money, you didn't. And it was a very desperate time for for young girls without being not being able to take a shower on demand, and it was wild.
Where does the title Powder Necklace come from?
So the title, I named it Powder Necklace because, as I mentioned, taking a shower became this like symbol of the haves and the have-nots, and all of this having water really. And if so, what the girls what we would do is, after you taken a bath, people would put tons of powder on their necks. And it was sometimes it was okay, we didn't take a bath, so we're gonna put powder on our necks, to scented powder to cover the odor. But it was also a way, like if you had bathed, to sort of, show off that you'd bathed. So for me, it was as I was reflecting as I was writing this story and reflecting on that whole experience, I thought, wow, it was sort of our way of holding our heads up, in a difficult situation, and kind of making the best of it. So that's why I called it Powder Necklace.
Okay. And that was for children,
Well, it was for young adults.
young
Yeah.
adults.
Hmm.
Hmm. But it was more writing than pictures.
Yeah, it was a young adult novel. I mean, this was my first book. I really didn't know what I was doing. I wrote the book, and I didn't know that it was a young adult novel
Ah,
until people were like, "Yeah, you wrote a young adult novel." I'm like, "Oh, okay."
great. Works for me.
Yeah.
Well, what does being a writer mean to you?
I think being a writer means to me being able to articulate a time, a place, um, a mood, a moment, um, being able to articulate it, one for myself, but also to create a record that helps people who don't necessarily have that gift, um, to be able to sort of put words to the experience,
Hmm.
of living at a time, a place,
Hmm.
or having a certain feeling, about something.
Do you think there's a difference between being considered a writer and being an author? Are they the same or are they really different?
I do think that there is a difference, and not in a sort of, highfalutin way. I think the difference is the fact that I think, like when you asked me initially, like when do you think that you became a writer? My instinct is to say that I think I was always a writer, because I think if you write, you're a writer, and whether you're published or not, you're a writer.
Hmm.
If you have that inclination, that gift, and you sort of invest in that gift and invest and develop it, I think you're a writer. But I think with an author, I think then that's to me, I think of it as the business of being a writer, or the business of being, yeah, you are now sort of in business with your publisher. Publisher has invested a certain amount in you, and um, it then becomes a more sort of public facing thing. The work is not just for you anymore. The work is now being disseminated to a group and hopefully to as many people as possible. And you, as the writer, now have to figure out like, how do I get to my audience? How do I maximize or expand the reach of this thing that I wrote? How do I connect with people around the story and build a readership? Um, and how do I ultimately, my desire and goal would be to live off of this. How do I turn this into something that I can do, full time and live off of?
So you turned from a writer to being an author.
Yes, I am an author, and I'm hoping to get to the the point where I can do it 100% full time and it be 100% lucrative in that way.
So what are you doing now in addition to doing books?
I also freelance as a copywriter, so I'm
Ah,
still copywriting.
okay. I was wondering what you did. So you're doing still marketing and jingles and all those things?
Yeah, well, I'm my focus, I do that, but my focus is mainly in the digital space. So I write lots of
Okay.
websites and
Hmm.
web ads and social media copy and uh things of that nature, campaign work.
Well, that's is there anything that you've written or copywritten that we would all know?
Yeah, I mean, I've done a lot. I guess the maybe the most recent thing that I've done that people might be aware of, or some people might be aware of, is the Brooklyn Museum in New York did an exhibition called Africa Fashion, and I they created a short film to promote it. And they commissioned me to write an original piece for it, and so I wrote that piece and performed it in the film.
Mm,
So people who are into that kind of thing, a museum, that museum might be aware of it. But I've also written for I did a lot of work for L'Oreal Paris, USA, and I've just done a lot of beauty work. So many of the beauty brands you might be aware of, you might know. I've done some work for them.
cool. Well, you do have to do things to earn an income to be able to afford to write until you can do it full time.
Yeah, yeah. And I actually really love copywriting. I think it's been an incredible teacher in the sense of how to crystallize an idea in very short, in just a few words, how to convey emotion in just a few words. And also that storytelling is not just the words, it's how you deliver the story.
Hmm.
That's all part of it. So I think it's been an incredible teacher in that way.
I know for me as a speaker, it is how you tell the story.
Absolutely.
And I've learned over 23 and a half years of speaking how to take people inside the World Trade Center and actually have them travel with me and do all the things and experience all the things that I went through and then come out the other side. And I say that because so many people after I speak somewhere will come up and say, "We were with you in the building. We were with you with everything that you did." And I appreciate that there is a real significant art to storytelling. And part of it is also, and I'm sure that this is true for you as a writer and an author, that part of it has to be that you have to actually connect with the audience. You've got to understand the audience, you've got to connect with them, and you have to bring them along because they're not expecting to go with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I will say that I started one of your books, just the beginning of it, and I was just sort of running with Roselle. And I was so taken, so absorbed by the first few pages of it. You really do immerse us. And I think that that's the best kind of writing, when you're able to kind of present material that people may or may not be familiar with and make it riveting and really bring us into it and then have us feel invested.
Hmm. Well, and I think the last book that we did last year, Live Like a Guide Dog, I worked really hard to make sure that we were drawing people into the experiences because every chapter is actually taking lessons from one of my guide dogs and also from Fantasia, who is my wife's service dog. But each chapter relates to one of those dogs. And I wanted them to be environments where people, again, were drawn in and appreciate the dogs for what they are and what they do, not just some dumb animal that comes along.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah. It's so interesting. I think there's so much I guess I don't want to use the word. I guess what I want to say, there's a lot of mystery in the sort of human animal interaction, and a lot
Hmm.
of people just aren't aware of how powerful it is. And I'm saying that I speak for myself because growing up, actually, I was really, really scared of dogs and animals, all animals. And I so there's kind of two stories I'll share, but one is when we were growing up, my parents, were from Ghana. They wanted to eat goat meat, and at the time you couldn't just go to a supermarket and
No,
buy goat meat. So we used to go to a farm out in New Jersey that had goats, and we would have to go and have the goat, slaughtered and cut up and all that kind of stuff for the meat. And I remember that whenever the hand would go into, the pen where the goats were, the goats would just they would be so stressed out. They would like, part like the ocean
they
when this
know.
man walked in. And when he picked one out, there would be other goats in the pen that would start screaming in agony along with the goat that had been picked out. And I was just like, oh my gosh, that must be his family members, like, or
Yeah.
his loved ones. And I remember that was so eye-opening to me, like, wow. So I ended up years later, I wrote a short story and I actually did some research on goats and how brilliant they are. And I was just like, wow, oh my goodness, I remember that so well. But I have a cat right now, and my kitty cat is just such a joy, like just sort of to build that relationship with my pet is just such a beautiful thing. And how she just kind of, because I grew up really scared of pets and I sort of inherited her when I got when I got married, she's been very patient with me. Like, because at first I was so skittish around her, and I could see her kind of like rolling her eyes, like, I mean you no harm. You can pick me up. It's all good. And she's just been so wonderfully patient with
Yeah.
me. We've built that bond over time.
Well, yeah, I have, of course, my eighth guide dog, Alamo, and Stitch the cat. And Stitch
Oh,
is 15 and a half and a real cutie pie. We rescued her, actually. There were people who were living next to us, and he was moving out. His wife had died, and he just told the people who were moving all of his stuff out, take the cat to the pound. I don't want anything to do with it. And
oh,
we said, absolutely not. We'll find it a home. And then I asked what the cat's name was, and they told me the cat's name was Stitch. And I knew that this cat wasn't going to go anywhere because
yeah.
my wife had been a quilter since 1994. And a
Oh,
quilter is never going to give away a cat named Stitch.
Stitch, yes. Oh, I'm so glad Stitch found a home with you all.
Oh, yeah. Well, we found a Stitch.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
And,
Oh,
uh, and so she's got lots of personality. And so it really works out pretty well. No complaints. And I've always said whenever I get a guide dog, because my wife always had cats, when I get a new guide dog, I've always said and will continue to say it has to be a dog that's been raised around cats and has no
yeah.
problems with cats. I have seen a couple of guide dogs actually that hated cats.
Hmm.
and one almost killed a cat. And that's, I will never tolerate that. They
Yeah.
have to get along.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now,
Absolutely.
when we brought Alamo home, Stitch had a few concerns about this dog in her house. But she got over it when she decided that Alamo wasn't going to do anything to bother her, and they talk all the time now and rub noses and all
Oh,
that sort of
they
stuff. So they do really
do.
well.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, but it is great, and they bring so much joy and so many lessons to us that I
Yeah.
think is really important to learn.
Yeah, yeah, you're reminding me the first dog because my grandmother actually loves animals. And when I went to Ghana, she got a dog and as a kid, so we got a puppy. And the puppy was initially supposed to be a guard dog. But I would I would hand feed the dog sausages
Hmm.
and just spoil the dog so much that the dog could not be a guard dog. So I loved that dog, Joshua. Yeah.
Joshua. Well, but you and Joshua got along really well. And
We got along great.
one of the things that people sometimes ask me is if my dog trained to protect, and the answer is no, they're not trained. And then they've said, well, what would happen if somebody were to decide to attack you with the dog around? And my response will always be, and rightly so, I wouldn't want to be the person to try that and find out what'll happen.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
much more than guarding, there's love.
Yeah.
And I've always believed that dogs love unconditionally. I think trusting is a different story. They are open to trust, but but you have to earn their trust.
Mm-hmm.
They'll love you, but will they trust you? That depends on you. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's really pretty cool. But I would not want to be the person to ever decide to try to attack us, because I am sure that Alamo would not tolerate that at all.
No, not at all. How do you or how have you built trust with your pets?
Well, a lot of it has to do with they want us to be the pack leaders. They want us to be their team leader. And so I have to set the ground rules. So, for example, no jumping on the furniture and all that. But again, it's also how you convey that. So, if my dog is going to jump up on something and I don't want that, I'll say, leave it. And as soon as the dog obeys, I'll give the dog a food reward, a kibble,
Mm-hmm.
to let the dog know. And I'll also use a clicker, but I'll let the dog know I approve of what you did, not punishing them for, you know, something else.
Yeah.
So it's not punishment, it's positive rewards. I think that's extremely important. But also, it is in the stressful times being very focused and calm. So if we're walking somewhere and we get lost,
Mm-hmm.
that is not the dog's fault, because
Mm-hmm.
it's my job to know where to go and how to get where I'm going.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the dog's job to make sure that we walk safely to get there.
Mm-hmm.
So if we get lost, that's on me. And what I can't do or shouldn't do is panic and become very fearful and upset, because the dog will sense that. I
Mm-hmm.
have to stop and figure it out and continue to praise the dog, saying, what a good job you're doing, and so on. And those kinds of things are the things that will, over time, build that trust. I think it takes a good year to truly build a trusting relationship that is second to none, and that's the kind of teaming relationship that you want, whether it's a guide dog or any dog.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And even as far as that goes, although they're different, cats.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but it's all about building that relationship and conveying the command and conveying that you want to trust and be trusted.
Yeah, yeah. I think what you said that really resonated with me is that they want you to be the pack leader, and part of that is, you lay down the ground rules, but also you're responsible for them
Hmm.
and their well-being.
Yeah.
And yeah, that really resonates with me.
Well, so you wrote your first book, and then when did you write your second book?
My second book came out in 2022, so it was a 12-year spread
Wow.
between my first book and my second book.
Why so long?
Oh my gosh. My book, the book I was working on, like to sort of follow, was just rejected for for all that whole time. And I was, more and more distraught and, in despair about it. I didn't know what to do about it. And I actually, I was actually reading the Bible and I came across the fact that there was a blue curtain in King Solomon's temple. And I was like, why does it matter that the curtain was blue? And so I just started Googling casually and I discovered that there was a snail in antiquity that was harvested for the blue drops that it
Mhm.
secreted drops that were ultimately oxidized to turn blue. And I was like, what? I've never heard about this. I started doing some more research and I realized, like, oh my gosh, the color blue has such a fascinating history. Kids need to know about this. And so I wrote it really as a poem initially, but then I thought, I really want to see if I can get this published. And I was able to get it published. And that became my children's book, Blue, which was such a balm to my soul because after sort of a decade of getting, rejected and, close to a decade of getting rejected, this sort of beautiful, like sort of knowledge, I came across, but I was able to create a book. And it's just been a wonderful experience with the children's book.
Wow. So the full title of Blue is
It's Blue, a history of the color as deep as the sea and as wide as the sky.
wow. That should be enough to get the book sold. But as you point out, there's a lot of history,
Yes.
and that's pretty cool. So it was released in 2022, and the publishers finally bought into that, huh?
Well, yeah, I mean, that wasn't the novel that I've been working on. So I was still working. I did sell the novel, but that was its own journey. And I ended up writing another book that became, the book is called My Parents' Marriage. And it is not about my actual parents' marriage. It's a novel about a young woman for adult readers. This is my first book for adult readers. And it is about a young woman whose parents are in a polygamous union, and how they have a really turbulent polygamous union, and how that relationship kind of uh, casts a shadow on this woman's choices in relationships and marriage for
Hmm.
herself.
So you published that, My Parents' Marriage. You
Yes.
also did a collection, Relations. Tell me about
Yes, I
Relations.
did. Yeah. So Relations is an anthology of its stories, essays, and poems that are by writers from all across the continent of Africa. So I have Egyptian poets and Libyan, essayists and, Nigerian storytellers. Just it was a really amazing project to work on. I started working on it during August of 2020, which was sort of like I've heard it described as peak pandemic,
Mm.
right? We were several months into lockdown and it became this wonderful way for me to kind of connect while I was sort of holed up in my apartment in New York.
Okay. Now, were you married by then?
No, I was not. I had
Oh.
just started dating my now husband, and I was like, am I ever going to see this man again? Because he lived in California. So at that time, the planes were grounded. I
Yeah.
remember we were like on the very first flights that were able to start, that started and be on planes. There'd be like four people on the entire plane. Yeah.
Hopefully, you both weren't on planes going against each other at the same time. You
No,
did communicate a little more than that.
we did. We
Oh,
did.
good. Well, so um, you've published. So when was Relations published?
Relations came out in 2023, like
Okay.
January of 2023.
And My Parents' Marriage?
Came out in July of 2024. And the
Wow. Okay.
paperback just came out in July of 2025.
Which one?
The paperback of
The
my parents.
paperback. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Have any of them been converted to audio?
Yes. All but my first book are audiobooks. So Blue is an audiobook, beautifully read. And then their Relations, the stories and essays and poems are read
Hmm,
by two speaking artists. And then My Parents' Marriage is also wonderfully performed. So yeah, they're all in
that's
audiobook.
cool. Well,
Yeah.
so when you're writing, what's kind of the difference, or how do you um, differentiate between writing for young people and writing for adults? There must be differences.
Yeah, I think with for young people and the practical thing that I try to do is make sure that the vocabulary is familiar to them, mostly
Hmm.
familiar. I like to put in a stretch word now and then to kind of get them to like get to the dictionary and find out what it
Yeah.
means. But if I'm right, when I wrote Blue, for example, knowing that, the age group is the age spread is 4 to 8.
Mm.
Eight-year olds are in third grade, 4 year olds are in pre-K. So
Pre-K.
that's pretty big spread. So my sweet spot is first and second grade vocabulary words.
Okay.
It has to be something that they've been exposed to. So thinking of it in that way. The other thing too is breaking down concepts that are, as adults, we just assume that or you can go look it up, but just kind of thinking it through. So if I'm talking about, instead of saying that, there was a snail in antiquity who, dyers were harvesting blue dye from these snails, through after a process of oxidation, I wouldn't use any of those words. I would
Yeah.
say snail produced some drops that, when exposed to the air and the sun, turned blue. And so just sort of really kind of being mindful of that, and also thinking very visually, writing very visually. How can I create pictures with words that would be familiar to a child that can sort of ignite their imagination?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important to to deal with the visual aspects of it, but using words
Absolutely.
and really drawing people in. Because if you just say, "Well, you can see this in this picture," that doesn't mean a lot. And you're also, I would think, helping to teach or create the concept that some children might want to go off and write because they like how you say and what you say.
Absolutely. And when I talk to kids, I go or visit schools, I invite them, like, I wrote about the color blue. What's your favorite color? These are some things that I did to kind of learn about it. You can do these things to learn about your favorite color and write your own book.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I think so important to really draw people in and get them to think. And I think it's so much fun. For me, I do some of that, but I have probably more of a challenge because kids want to play with the dog. So it's
Yeah.
all about the dog. I did a lecture at a K through 6 elementary school in San Francisco several years ago. I'm trying to remember what school it was. Anyway, and the teacher said, you can only talk for about 10 or 12 minutes because they just won't pay attention any longer than that. 35 minutes later, I finally ended the discussion because they were so fascinated to hear me talk about what my dog did. And then I carried that over to how blind people work and function and all that. And the fact is, they were fascinated. The teachers couldn't believe it. But for me, it was a great lesson to know that it's all about creating these pictures that people can follow.
Yeah, and also to extending those pictures or those words into an experience for kids.
Yeah,
They really appreciate sort of like seeing it kind of um seeing the having the concept come to life
yeah.
in some way. And so I'm sure when they see your dog or are able to interact with your dog, that must be so wonderful for them.
But it's important for them to understand what the dog is all about. So by the time they get to interact with the dog, we've talked about things like you never pet a guide dog in harness.
Yeah.
This is what a guide dog does, and this is what they don't do.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things to cover. So it's great when I have the opportunity to really teach them. And sometimes we'll walk around a classroom and I'll show them what he does
Yeah.
because it's important to be able to do that.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
And and he loves it, of course, all the way. So no question about that. You haven't lived until you've seen two or three hundred kids all wanting to pet this dog, and the dog knows what to do. He's down on the floor with every appendage stretched out as far as he can go to maximize petting places, petting exposure. Oh, it is so funny.
I love
Oh,
that.
he loves it. He's so happy. He doesn't care whether he'll do it more with kids even than adults, but he'll
Yes.
do it with everybody. It's all about petting me and just remembering I'm the dog.
I love that.
Well, you've gone through a fair amount of time between books, and I'm sort of curious. What do you think about all the various kinds of changes and ebbs and flows that have come along in the book business and the book publishing business and so on?
Yeah, there have been a lot of changes. I think Um, when my first book came out, like things like, Instagram, Bookstagram did not exist.
Mm-hmm.
There weren't many sort of podcasts or things of that nature. So, I think that there are more venues and more platforms to, get the message out about the book. But I think also it's also just hard. It's in some ways it also feels in some ways more challenging to get the word out because in addition to like yes, there are more venues in that way regard, there are fewer book reviewers and fewer places to get a book reviewed. And there's a whole kind of interesting business around getting reviews. So it's just not the same in that way. But then at the same time, I think what remains the same is connecting with readers.
Mm-hmm.
I think the most effective thing is, writing a book that's good and then getting people who have read it and liked it to
To review
evangelize
it.
it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. To tell people, I liked it. Please buy it. Or have you heard of? And because at the end of the day, that's what's going to give it some wind.
When Thunderdog came out, we did mention about reviews, and it actually has had like well over 1,600 reviews since it came out in 2011. Live Like a Guide Dog hasn't had, of course, so many yet, but every time I get a chance to talk about that book, I ask people to go review it and tell them why it's so important because potential readers want to know what people think of the book.
Yeah, for sure. For
And
sure.
it really is important for readers to review and just be honest and say what you think. It's fine, but people should do that. For me, I think one of the biggest things that I see that publishers are doing less of is, in a lot of ways, true marketing. Um, you don't see them doing nearly as much. Of course, I know it's more expensive, but to help create book tours or anything like that, they focus only on social media, and that's not the way to market the book.
Yeah, I mean, I've never worked inside a publishing office, so I don't know how they make these decisions and what goes on. But I think What I have come to sort of think how I've come to think of it is the publisher is my business partner. They
Mm-hmm.
sort of invested in terms of they've given me an advance. They're going to do the turnkey things like, make sure the book gets reviewed by Publishers Weekly or sorry, Publishers Marketplace, or no, Publishers Weekly. I was correct.
Right.
And Kirkus reviews
Kirkus, right.
and all those kinds of things. And maybe they'll do a mailing to, who they believe are the people that they need to mail it to. But outside of that, unless, it's stipulated in your contract or, you are that high,
Yeah.
that that celebrity author or that best-selling author that they are willing to put that money behind. You're working with your publicist who's been assigned to your book is probably working on 10 other books and
Yeah.
can only devote so much to it. And so what I've learned is, yeah, I'm thankful that, I have this publisher, but I also know that I need to do a lot of work on my own to get
Yeah.
the book out
You've
there.
got to be your best marketer.
Yes,
But there's value in that too, because you can tell the story, whatever it is, like no one else.
exactly, exactly.
And so that's really pretty important.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And you can be, I think also giving yourself permission to be creative.
Yeah.
Um, how can you get the word out in really creative ways? Like again, the publisher, these are things that like if there was, there were many people dedicated to your book for this amount of time, they could kind of sit there and brainstorm and do all those things. But, the reality is in most cases, it's a lean and mean team.
It
They
is.
don't have that bandwidth. So yeah, just kind of coming up with creative ways. And at times what I have learned to do is how can if I have an idea that is maybe low cost, but I can't necessarily do it on my own, how can I ask them for support because they do have, a little bit more
They do
resources.
have. Yeah. And and the how is really pretty simple actually. You just ask.
Exactly, exactly,
And either they will or they won't or you'll share it or whatever. But
exactly.
and I have found that same thing to be true. Well, Nana, if people want to reach out to you, how do they do that? If they might want to talk about you doing copywriting for them or whatever, how can
Yeah.
people find you?
So my website is nanabrewhammond.com
Can you spell,
without the
please?
hyphen. It's NanaBrewhammond.com. And I have a newsletter there, so a newsletter sign up so they can sign up to be a part of my newsletter and connect with me that way. They can also find me on Instagram. I'm at NanaEkua writer on Instagram, and I'm also on Facebook at that same name. And then on Twitter, I am that without the writer. So Nanaekua.
Okay, cool. Well, I hope people will reach out, and I hope that they will read your books and like them and review them, which
I
is
hope the same thing.
yeah. Well, I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank all of you for listening and watching us today. We really appreciate you being here with us. I'd love to hear what you think. Please feel free to email me. I'm reachable at Michael, Michaelhelhi, at Accessibe, ACCESSIBE.com. Michael H.I. at Accessibe.com. Love to hear your thoughts and love to get your opinions. I would really appreciate it if you would give us a 5-star rating when you have the opportunity to review this podcast. We really value your ratings and reviews very highly and definitely want to know what you think, but please give us a great rating. We love that. If you know anyone who wants to be a guest on a podcast or you think ought to be a guest, we're always looking for guests. And Nana, you as well. If you know anyone, we're always looking for more people to come on the podcast and tell their stories. So we appreciate it if you'd let us know. By the way, you can also go to my podcast page, www.michaelhingson.com/podcast. That's another way to reach out to me as well. But definitely anything that you can do to bring more folks to us, we value it very highly. And so with that, once again, Nana, I want to thank you for being here. This has been great.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on, and you are such an inspiration. And thank you.